It's the Dev Friday show with Mark and Tim. 'Twas the Dev Friday before Christmas, and that's all you get for $5.
All right, we're somehow, I know, what are we, 10 minutes late, technical issues. If you've listened to last week's podcast and I haven't updated the audio yet, you'll see that the audio's weird. The voiceover guy talks over himself because, I don't know. This is all the time we got. We've got about an hour on Friday. Everything else, yeah, we just got to figure out how to fit it in.
Everything just falls apart around it.
That's right.
Yeah.
What we cannot do in like the hour and then the 30 minutes before the hour starts, because that's usually when I mix down everything. It just doesn't get done for this. That's how much time we're going to dedicate to this podcast, folks. About an hour and a half a week. So
maybe once Santa can bring us some of that Patreon money, we can actually put some money into the show.
I believe we'd have to be on Patreon or something, or we'd have to be on whatever that cryptocurrency.
Don't talk about that, Tim.
No, don't talk about the crypto now.
Don't talk about the crypto.
But it was the podcast 2.0 stuff, right? Wasn't it that you would like pay for value or dollars for bits for I don't know.
Oh yes, the value for value podcast 2.0.
Yeah.
Eventually we'll get there.
Do that thing.
Eventually we'll get some boostograms.
But it won't be worth anything because is the crypto market tanked? Mark, has it?
It's gone down a bit, and I think I pulled out the right time.
Yeah.
I pulled out a long time ago.
Yeah.
I still use it for the USDC coin, like for when I want to move money back and forth between accounts. I still use that. That's pretty practical. And I have my Coinbase card, which I get awards on if I buy purchases using USDC crypto with the Coinbase card. So I keep a little bit of cash on there for fun and just kind of have just to kind of transfer some money around. But really, yes, I hit the eject button probably a couple of years augh. Once I started seeing it was definitely pulling back around. Well, it went crazy right after the pandemic happened, and then everybody was at home. They were getting their stimmy checks. They're rolling that into crypto, and yeah, the market went crazy.
That's why we needed a stimulus. Way to throw it into crypto. Way to go, guys. Way to go.
But then after, and then like I said, after that, then it was kind of like, all right, I started to see, like, I started to pull out slowly here and there, and it's once it crashed really high. I think once it went back from, I don't know, was it about 30K? I think it was down to like 30K. I was like, okay, it's going down to like 18. Looking at the charts, Tim, because I am a technical trader. So looking at the charts of Bitcoin, I can see, yes, it was going to come back to around 18 or 17 or something like that. So that's right now it's around 17. So I don't know if it's bottomed out, but could go down lower. Could go down 12. Could go down to 8. I don't know. It's a rough time because the FTX scammers, they just.
Oh, that's right. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. The FTX people. Yeah. I've not followed that story.
It's interesting. It is a crazy rabbit hole if you go down. Where how it's not just the fact of the founder of FTX, a guy who pretty much scammed everyone, the Bernie Madoff 2.0, how he ran that company. Well,
it's good to see we're reinventing some things with technology, and technology continues to make what we do better, whether it be steal people's money or whatever.
Yeah. We just get more efficient about it. That's all it is. But it's interesting to see the tentacles of how it's reached into all these different crypto markets or coins, how they're all affected by this.
Really?
So I don't know how that's going to land out. I think going into 2023, I don't know if I would advise anybody to invest in crypto at this point, but who knows? I still think Bitcoin and crypto is going to be around, but I think I talked about this before with you, which I think this probably could be a good thing because I think if the market could shake itself out and we kind of get away from this whole crazy investment side of it or the gambling side of it and actually go more of a transactional value side of it, as a technology, get back to that. I'm all for that.
There's a lot of good things about the technology behind crypto, but yes, all of the hype and that part of it is I don't think helpful from a technology standpoint. But anyway, the only crypto I had was stuff that someone had kind of donated to me or given to me. Like it was a coin that kind of came on the market and they're like, here you go. And so I had some of that. It spiked, got worth about $400. So I pushed some of it to Ethereum, some of it to Bitcoin, some of it to some other ones. They spiked. At one point, it was worth like $4,000, what I had. But like getting it out was almost impossible because of, I think it was an Ethereum based coin, but like the fees to move it out were high. And I'll just let it ride. Now it's worth nothing. I think, but like I said, I didn't put anything into it. It was all free money anyway.
Yeah.
So, which is pretty much anyway. That's a different topic. So, how was your week, Mark? It's been 2 weeks, right? I think.
Yeah, we took a little bit of break there. Had some family stuff going on last week, so wasn't able to do my weekly chat with you, which made me a little bit sad. But now we're trying to get back in the saddle, back in the Christmas spirit, Tim.
Get that
with
Christmas
you.
spirit back, yeah.
Because I need to hear this jingle every week.
It looks like we got 2 more weeks of that, right? Because we'll be able to do the 23rd is actually the Dev Friday before Christmas. And I don't know what we're gonna do for that. But
this week was the last week of classes. So that's always a jolly time of the year. Students freaking out about both the students freaking out about their final projects, and also me being so happy that I do not have to teach anymore. I don't have to prepare any lectures.
So lots of emotion, huh?
Yeah, back and forth.
Is this your your game object-oriented programming that you're teaching using Python and having them construct a game? This is the final project. They have to give you a game.
It is, and so I have a few students who are doing really well. I saw because the final 2 weeks of classes we do sort of code reviews.
You look at their final
project reviews. Like, they share the project with everybody. We share it in class. They play it. They share their code. We talk about it. We talk about problems they're having, solutions that they're working on, and to do a little bit of code review, right? So we do that the final 2 weeks. So I have a few students in the class who are actually doing a really, really good job and doing their own work. I try to help them out as much as possible by giving them example code or templates that they can kind of use as a starting point to kind of build on top of. And I can, there's some students who are heavily using those templates and just doing a little bit more than what the template does. And then I have students who really went their own direction with it and just did something crazy. So it's kind of interesting how it turned out. But I did have one thing that I wanted to talk to you about this week.
Just one.
Both a hot topic and then probably also a benign topic.
Knowing you, we'll probably hit the hot topic first.
Comments and code, Tim.
This is a hot topic? So
yes.
We're gonna okay. What controversy have I missed here in the programming sphere?
All right. So this came about because I was realizing something with the examples I was giving in that class about how was all of the code examples that I wrote myself. I realized at the end, I'm actually not writing that many comments. I wrote a comment block up top, basically to document the file, say this is the name of the file.
Good code doesn't need comments.
Yes. I want to see where you land on this.
Yeah.
And then also, I was reading a blog post of a developer who worked who worked on the Chrome team, actually from the beginning. He was one of the first developers on Chrome for working with Google, and he talked about kind of the back and forth how Chrome was was a fork of WebKit. So there was times he had to work directly with the Apple developers and the back and forth that he had. And he was surprised about the engineering culture between Google and Apple, where
there's a difference.
Where Apple makes such good software, Tim, they do not require unit tests or do not require comments in their code.
Well, okay, but but they're doing functional tests. I'm assuming they have automated.
I don't know. He just made that comment in his blog post because he was talking about it was interesting to look at the different cultures of the engineering teams. How his team had a very strict, coming from Google, document your code, run unit tests, have those systems in place, and then Apple's kind of freely doing whatever they want, not running unit tests, not documenting their code. And it was kind of interesting working with them. So that got me to think too about the fact of it's kind of interesting how the older I get, the less comments that I write. But what I do in my code is I'm being as explicit as possible with how I define variable names, method names, having really strong style rules that I try to follow when I'm writing my code. But I really don't put any comments in my code anymore.
This dovetails with what I think it's the last show we were talking about. Your desire for better, stronger types because you're in Python and you can't type your properties and your objects.
You could do type hints. You could do type hints, but it's not enforced. It's like an optional
type hints. And you can do type hints on the methods. But from what you were telling me, you can't type hint on the properties. So
you can't know. I did look into this. Like I said, it's not something I see that often. Maybe just the code I'm looking at, but I did see that you can do it, but it's not really. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's not really used that much.
Okay, is it enforced though? So if you go and change your property, would it reject it and say it's a type error?
That I think that's a good question because I didn't go to the extent. I did the argument hits for the function calls, and it did. So if it did pass in something,
Right.
so it would have some enforcement of it, but comparing that we talked about before, comparing it to a typed safe language, it's just it's different how it's like it's enforced. Also, I think it runs through a different system than the dynamic compiler. It's more. Oh, sorry. No, let me back up here. It's been a long week. No, actually, what it does enforce it, but it doesn't enforce it in the interpreter. It enforces it outside, sort of how TypeScript works.
Like
So
from a
TypeScript
static
works.
analysis type of a thing?
Yes. So it's more for tooling. So they have type hints built into the language, but it's more for tooling.
Okay, so in that case, you could at runtime actually
Yeah.
do something that the static analysis couldn't
Yes.
catch.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so you don't actually have the safety of saying, if I have declared that this property of my object is this type, I know for sure it's never a different type. So you still have to have those silly checks that are like, hey, is it this? But I think, yeah, these two things dovetail. Like if you're saying I write less comments, but I prefer strongly typed language, I think you're seeing two different sides of what is pretty much the same coin there.
Because what I'm seeing from also students, and I'm thinking back to when I was in college and how it was really drilled into us, write comments, document everything, right? And there is great value to that. I talk about to the students saying, yes, when I'm just starting off a program or a class that I'm working on or whatever, a script, if I don't know exactly what to write, I'll type some notes, right? So I'll kind of just do it in pseudocode and just type it out some comments, just so I can kind of work through the process. I think there's a very, very valuable kind of exercise to go through. And they're taught that. I think that's a really good thing. But what happens though is that they definitely write the comments, and the comments are pretty much they're kind of self-explanatory in a sense. Like, okay, yeah, I get you wrote the comment. So I'm like,
the thing. In the PHP community, there's I think it's Jason McQuarrie, we call him JMac, has a book on code style and like just basic code style concepts. And he tells the story of, I think it was a mentor of his would call them cooking show comments, where it's like when you're watching a cooking show, right? What does the person say? And now I'm going to put this in the oven. Yeah, of course you are. We see you putting it in the oven, right? They're talking through exactly what they're doing.
Yep.
And when you're pseudocode, like 100% when I'm staring at a problem, like, what do I actually need to do here? I need to, and then there's comments that are like, go ask this thing for that. Go check for this state. Return early if it's bad. Do some work and then return the result. Like it'll be written out like that. And then as I fill them out, those comments are now meaningless because hopefully the code shows you, like if you're saying go get the user from session, well, you should have like session get user. Okay, that's what it's doing. No one should have to explain that. You should be writing method names and using interfaces and the vernacular of your objects should explain what it's doing. You shouldn't be like, well, what does that mean? If it's asking the session or the request or something to get user, I'm guessing it's getting the user from there. Okay, I know that. So if you write well thought out methods and then you decouple it so you're not doing a ton of stuff in one method, it's really clear to see, oh, this is what this method does. It gets the user, checks the state, returns early, does some work, returns the result of that work when that happens. I can see that. At that point, it's like, I don't need comments to tell, especially comments around conditionals, right? Where you're like, so if the user's not, has not confirmed their registration, then don't do anything.
Yeah.
Well, what's the code going to say? If not user has confirmed registration, it's like, well, that's what it's going to say. What are you telling me? So yeah, those cooking show comments are pretty much pointless, but they're also dangerous because you'll go through and you'll change the code.
Oh, that's a good point.
But you won't change the comments.
That's a really great point.
The next developer comes through and they're like really confused because it says something about, well, if the user hasn't confirmed their registration, but the condition has changed because we decided we didn't care about that anymore. Now we care if the user has actually added a credit card. So the comment says if the user hasn't confirmed their registration, don't do anything. And then you look at the next line and it says if user, get cards greater than 1. Count get cards greater. You're like, what's going on here? So those comments, they're not just at best kind of pointless because the next line should tell you what you're actually doing. They're dangerous because you'll forget to update them.
Yeah, especially if you work on another developer's code too. Like that was a snare I didn't think about it, but I know I've ran in the past trying to make a change to somebody else's code. I may not think about making a change to the comments. It's not the first thing I think about. So unless it's enforced within the culture, within the company, the style guide or the rules you're trying to follow as a development team, then maybe it can work out too. But one thing I was seeing too with students were like, yes, they were really good at writing comments, but really bad with style. Seeing good style rules like how do you name your class names, your method names, proper naming.
With Python, you have to have the right white space.
Well,
but you're talking about
and that's great. Of course, and that forces them to understand blocks, so they can understand encapsulation blocks and control, kind of how to the flow of the code. They can understand that better. But just having good style rules, so they know to name your class names with uppercase character, or keeping the name of the file for that class in a similar name than the name of the class. Unless it's like a file that contains multiple classes, but I don't want them to do that. Or just having good naming rules. Because I think if you name your variables or your code well, if you just write your syntax
you're saying A is not a good name for a variable. Just like A equals 1, B equals.
Or you're using what drives me crazy is using numbers
for variable names.
For variable names. It drives me, or even class names. That's what I was seeing in when I was doing the code reviews. I was seeing they were doing like level 1, level 2, level 3 as the class names, and I was like, okay, well,
you could definitely though I can see it.
Well, it's good to have a level class, but then how then you're going to be using that level class either through if you're going to use that to inherit or to create another class from. But they were starting to do this numbering system in other places and how they name their everything. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Oh, because it wasn't like you're at the first level, you're at the second level. It was more just like, I've got a level class. I've got another level class. I've got a third level class.
And I see this all the time in my web design class where I see students who just get lazy about naming CSS rules. Section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4, thing 1, thing 2, thing 3. And I'm like, when I'm reading that, I don't know what that is.
What is that even telling me?
I know. It's and it's just like, I don't know if it's probably ignorance, but it's just because they haven't got the experience of working with other people's codes and understand the fact, when you're writing code, you're not just writing for yourself. Well, you're writing for yourself to maintain in the future because you want to be able to look back at your code and be able to understand what it did.
I have code review comments all the time where I just say we should do this for future us. Because we are not going to remember why we did this, and that kind of circles back to those comments. The comments that are valuable are the comments that say why, not what, but the comments that say why. Because the what, if I can't tell the what from the code, there's something wrong with the code style. There's something wrong with either we're doing too much in one place and I can't even comprehend it, or we haven't clearly named things in such a way that it communicates what it actually does. Yeah. And I mean, if that is the case and we're working with legacy code and we can't change those names, then yes, you may need a comment about what this actually does, because it feels like it does something different, where we say, yeah, this is poorly named for now, but what we're really doing here is checking, the user's something or other, right? Yeah. But if with the comment that's useful for me is why? Why are we checking this state? That because that communicates something of actual value. Because the what should, like you're saying, the what should be clearly named variables. And what is it? Naming things is hard. We know that. But the reason why naming things is hard is because you're trying, hopefully, to convey what this thing actually does to future us, future you, future developers, right?
And that, I guess, comes with experience. I agree that naming things is hard, but the older I get, it actually gets to be a little bit easier because maybe you've been through many programs, you've written a lot of code, what are good names, what bad names, and then it just gets to be a little bit easier. But then for somebody just learning this for the first time, it's kind of hard to see the value of it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think sometimes if you're just approaching it, you're thinking, I just need to store a value in a variable, because you're thinking about the fact that you're going to compare two variables, and you're not thinking about the fact that code I hate this, and I'm going to sound like some developers that I'm not saying. Boy, I'm getting I'm turning myself.
Oh, go with it.
It's like code is art in its own way.
Oh, yes.
But not like the stupid way where you're like, you need to use my framework because my framework code is art, but your framework code is dumb. No, I'm not saying it like that.
Beautiful, Tim. I like that.
but because what I'm talking about. So it's not like that, but it is communicating concepts, which is what art is, right? Like because you're in design.
It's expression.
Yeah.
You're expressing something.
So name that variable. Tell me what you're doing with it. Paint the picture of what is going on in this method. What are we trying to accomplish? And when your variable name is A, just because you're like, oh, I need to store this value to use it later, you're not writing an assembly. You don't need to worry about where things are stored and using small names because a register. We're not doing that. These are high level abstractions over that type of programming.
Those are good times.
Make a big name for me. Tell me what's going on about this. Now, I mean, you got the Java people where they can get a little bit verbose, but yeah, there's importance in explaining what you're doing. And I think you're right that to some extent that's learned because in the first, it's like learning any language, right? Or any type of communication. At first, you're just thinking about like I need to assemble these things together, and then you're thinking, well, how do I best communicate in this language? Versus I just need to take these bits and pieces and put them together, and like I need a variable to hold this value because I'm going to need to add it to this other variable, and because all you're thinking about is the what I'm doing and like how I'm going to have to put a verb and a noun or how I'm going to have to put a variable and a variable together, you're not really saying, well, what really expresses that the best? Right? Because then as you get more familiar with language, then you're like, I'm going to now start picking words that really express or that express more than just what I'm doing, but the emotion behind it, like as we're talking about writing and how we communicate in that style. Once you start doing more and more with it, you realize how to express better what you're trying to do.
Well, a Java developer
has terrible job of
has nothing on an Objective-C developer.
Oh, really?
Have you ever seen some Objective-C code?
Oh, I kind of remember seeing some Objective-C code.
That's the most verbose code I've ever read in my life, and I tried to write my life.
And do they use the dot notation?
No.
To descend into objects.
Oh yeah, descend into object. Yeah.
Because it's like something dot something dot something dot something.
Well, it's not just, but it's just defining. It's just because of we're talking about how we name things, but a lot of the naming systems or conventions comes from also the frameworks of the libraries that developers use. So that is from an API standpoint when you're writing, accessing the Mac APIs, the SDK. That is very, very verbose, and then developers just adopt that. They just, it just becomes a standard that they just develop their programs with. So that was something I was just going back and forth today, kind of this week has been reviewing student code and kind of thinking also next semester as I'm going to be teaching other programming classes and how to approach style and syntax and how to convey proper ways to do things, and also get students to, what are also ways to, maybe I could get students to appreciate that more too. To say it takes a little bit more time and effort. Like it's worth the time and effort to think through, how we write, how we name our code, our variables and our, properties, functions, everything of that in our code, so that it makes it easier for us to work through problems or also work with other developers.
I don't know. I'm wondering if an example would help, like because you do the live code, right, where you have GitHub Copilot just spit out stuff.
Well, that's where my mind was going with this too. We're like, students are actually learning how to write really good comments, or just they're very comfortable writing comments, and now the systems is just going to write the comment. The code's going to be generated for you.
I'll write that for you using somebody else's work product. But I wonder if like an example function where you use terrible comment or terrible.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, because it's hard for me to do. Yeah, that's a good point.
And go through that and be like, So because I feel and this is what I'm doing. As I talk about being able to articulate and communicate better as you get more familiar with the medium through which you're communicating. I think I did a terrible job in that last segment of trying to even make that point. But
sounds like me, Tim. That's me every day.
I feel like they are so focused on what they're doing, like, oh, I'm going to compare two variables, so I just need two variables, and that's a kind of an implementation detail, just two variables, whatever, call it A and B. But it's like, no, what are you really doing? You're not comparing two variables. You're gonna do that, but what you're doing is you're describing or you're figuring out where the center of my asteroid should be moving, right, in the game, like what direction it should be going. So why don't we communicate that? So, and if you come with an example that just has obscure variable names, and it's like, what does it do? I don't really even know what it. I think it's taking that and it's adding that, but then you give them names, like, oh, look at that. So and come at this approach that really, this is what's also weird. And again, since this is all, I mean, anybody who listens to this podcast knows we do not plan anything.
No, I don't.
So this is all off the top of our head, and there's like ideas that may not.
Just like I don't write unit tests, I don't plan this podcast.
Right. But it strikes me, as we have this conversation, it strikes me that it's what's really interesting about programming. I know other people have talked about this because it's kind of in the back of my mind. I'm sure I've seen it somewhere. But you're really writing two things for two audiences. You're writing for the computer, where you have to be, and the computer doesn't care what the variable name is, right? Unless it kind of does. But you're writing for the computer, and you're also writing for people. And you can't just write for one of those audiences. It has to be for both. And where really good code is found is when you know how to both communicate to the human reader of the code and the machine reader of the code in an efficient and effective way. And that's kind of, I think, maybe what at the focus is. I'm learning this new language. Programming is new to me. All I'm thinking about is how do I communicate with very tedious instructions to tell this machine what to do, and not realizing that also I should be trying to communicate what we're doing to non-machines.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, somehow making that obvious, or that point, or illustrating that. And
I do like
your necessarily sure how to do that exactly, but
well, I like your idea of comparing like a block of code that's written badly and then a block of code that's written better. It's hard for me to do that, to write some code badly, but it's kind of like, or try to purposely do that. But I think that's a really good point of saying, okay, this is some way that you may see this, or you may be tempted to write this way, but then what are the outcomes of this? The outcomes could be, it's harder for you to understand what's going on if you look at this the next week, or for somebody's trying to read it. For, like I said, well, I do bring this up when I'm reading their code. We do in code reviews, which comes up right in your code reviews. If you're reading the code and don't understand what's going on, they need to explain it to you, right? And then we need to talk through and say, okay, well, why don't I understand this?
Right.
Is there something about the flow? Is there something about the way this is being written that it's not accessible from a developer standpoint, saying I can't grok this. Yeah. I don't use that word because they won't know what that means. But that is something that we do definitely go through.
Yeah. There's been I don't want to say all the time, but like that's part of code review is saying, hey, maybe we should name this differently because we're using it differently and it's not obvious what it's doing. And that's a valid thing in code review. It's not like, oh, does it work? Okay, yeah. Is it syntactically correct? Are you introducing bugs? Is there a race condition you're not checking? Yeah, those are all important things to be looking for too. But then, does this communicate well? And are we going to come back and scratch our head when we look at this code? That's the other thing that I think as you program for longer, the clever solutions aren't as appealing.
Yes,
I mean,
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, like clever solution. No, give me a straightforward solution that does maybe a clever thing.
Yeah,
give me a straightforward solution.
It's super interesting. Have you ever spent some time on those coding competition sites?
Oh, not really.
Like solve this puzzle in like the with the least lines of code or the shortest period of time. Like it's usually based on time or processing time, and like you have these developers who write this algorithm basically in one line or two lines. And but you cannot understand it at all.
No idea what's going on. Yeah.
And it looks cool. It's like, wow, that's pretty interesting, pretty smart. But I'm like, I have no idea what it's doing. But then you see, like, then you compare that to the same algorithm, but it's written out in, let's say, 10 to 20 lines. And then you say, okay, I can actually follow it. But then isn't that one line more efficient? So shouldn't we be writing it that one? And it does make you think that, like saying, well, I guess. I don't know. That it does bring up an interesting problem. Like, it does more concise code from a processing standpoint. Could that be better?
It depends, right? It depends on what you're actually doing. Yeah. And if you're calling different methods or in that longer form, you're doing things that are not not computationally equivalent.
If you're doing too
But a
many
lot
inner
of
loops,
times your compiler or your interpreter or whatever that first pass is on your code hopefully optimizes it,
yeah.
right? Unless you're doing things that then the optimizer can't, and that's why it might be better to have this shorter form.
Yeah.
And it brings to mind in my mind like PHP 7 now, like a more of it's been a recent addition to language, has what we call the null coalescing assignment operator. So I mean it's a mouthful, right? But null coalescing means when the variable is null, you use this operator afterwards to say, oh, if it's null, then it's going to be this instead. But the null coalescing assignment operator says if the variable is null, instead of evaluating and saying, oh, variable operator value to use if it's null, it's
You're
now,
saying so the instance that would happen would be if a developer assigns a new value to the variable, which it would be null, and then if that happens, default to a different value. What's the point of having, because a value?
No, that's the thing, and this is where it's tough to do just with voice, right? Like me to show an example would be great, but that's not kind of what we do here, right? But if I had a variable, and let's say the variable was I'm trying to think of a thing. Let's call it user, right? Like if it's the user, and then I had the null coalescing operator where I was going to say return user, then followed by the null coalescing operator says, well, if user's null, this line's going to evaluate to something else. And there I actually said, hey, go out to the database and fetch the user using the ID I have. So now it's like, oh, if we already have the user, return it. If we don't, go fetch it from the database. The null coalescing assignment operator says, not only do you look at the first variable and say, if it's null, use what's on the other side of the operator, but also take what's on the other side of the operator and assign it to that variable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you'll both, the expression will be evaluated to whatever the thing on the other side of the operator was, but we'll also assign the variable at the same time, and that leads to something that at first, and this is how this ties in, right? At first you look at it, you're like, oh, that's clever, and it may not be completely understandable, but as you start using it more and more, it then just becomes a shorthand that all the developers on a team may understand. So what we can do with that is we can create like a cache variable, say in an object, this cache, make it an array, because PHP array hashes are the same thing, right? This cache, and then ask the array for the key that matches some ID you passed me. And you use the null coalescing operator to say, or assignment operator to say, hey, if that key is already set in the hash, return it. If not, do the work to load it. At the same time, set the value, because it's the null coalescing assignment operator, and then return it. So we basically have a cache where normally you'd say, hey, if it's not in the cache, your code would be like a multiple line where you do if cache, then the key for the, it's because the cache is a hash essentially. In other languages, in PHP it's a array, but if the cache has this key, or actually usually it would read if the cache does not have this key, set the key in the cache, and then outside of this conditional, return the cache, return that value from the cache, because if it wasn't set, you just set it. We can reduce that kind of if and then return to a single line, which again, when you first see it, feels clever, but once you understand it, you're like, oh, this is just how we do this. This is shorthand for this type of thing.
With that pattern, would you be often setting user to null then as like a thing you would do, just assuming that would happen?
No, it's that pattern's more like you have a bunch of values that like the service is going to load.
As you described this, thinking about, well, what are the case then for that variable to get assigned null in order for that?
It starts null.
Then why not just give it the value then? Like, why does it start null?
It's a cache pattern. It's a cache pattern where say we have a service that says you give me an ID of a user, I'm going to load it, right? So then we just in this service object we have a cache variable that is an array, or like I said, in other languages it's going to be a hash, and we're basically saying if my cache variable, which is an array, has a key that matches the ID, return that. If it doesn't have that key, go fetch it from the database, do the actual work, fetch the user from the database, set it in my cache array using the ID as the key, and then just return the cache. So you're just saying only load it if I need it. It's starting null, and what we're just able to do is take what used to be like kind of a very repetitive pattern where it's like,
Okay.
first you check to see if the array has the key. If it doesn't have a key matching that object, load it from the database and stick it in the array with that key. And then once you're all done, just return the value of that, return the cache variable, that key, that element of the cache variable by ID, because if you didn't have it set, you just loaded it. We can take that kind of very copy paste. Yep, we got a bunch of those in this application. Everywhere that we have an internal cache on an object, we look at the cache array, see if the ID, if it has a key that matches. If not, set that key with what we got from the database, and then return the value of that key because we know we just set it. We can take those 4 or 5 lines, which are very repetitive, and replace with one very clean line that's just return the cache, double question mark equals, load it from the database. And at first you look at it and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Because this is a new language construct, haven't seen that before. And that becomes one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's clever in that, yeah, if you had the actual conditional, like you would say these two functions are equivalent. This conditional checks, is it null? If it's not, if it's null, load it and set it, and then return what you just set. They're equivalent. I can understand this a lot easier than I can understand the short version, the one-line version over here. But once as a team we become familiar with it, it is actually a lot nicer to write that. It's not that it's better for the computer to compile it. Maybe it is. I don't know. And when I say compile it, interpret it in PHP. I don't know if it's actually faster for it, it's just more performant. But just from this is the pattern we use, it's a whole lot easier just to set that up instead of be like, yep, set the conditional, and then it's like, well, different devs might do different things. Do you set it and say, hey, if it is set, return it early? If not, no, that's not as clean because it's a weird conditional. And we're like, no, we wouldn't like it that way. Either way, this is just a simple way to do it. It's one line of code, and it's like return the cache or the thing that does the work.
Because it saves you time, like long run in your team.
Familiar with that clever solution.
Saves time. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that came up as you're talking
that
I used to do occasionally in class, but I don't do anymore, is ternary expressions. So if I check for the conditional in the assignment,
same thing. Like,
I stopped doing that because it was hard, really hard. And honestly, I could see the student's perspective, because even for me, it was hard. Just kind of like just remember, okay, the order, and then make sure that was going to do that. Now, if I'm writing up my own projects, I'll just do it because it definitely saves me time. But if I'm showing somebody a ternary expression, or if I just write it and explain it, they were like, what? It takes a while to kind of really, truly understand that. So it becomes second nature. So the way you describe it, if it's adopted within your team and everybody accepts it, they just put in their own time to process that and to really go through it, then I see the value in that.
And with the ternary expressions, it's like, if you're doing it for the same thing all the time, but when you run into a new one, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like even if you understand exactly how they work, when you run into a new one, you still have to in your mind be like,
yeah, it still takes a minute.
All right, if that's true, then I'll return that, but then I'll return that value, especially when you have like nested expressions like that. But if it's like, oh, this is always how we do a null and default. This is the pattern for null and default. Then you just see it, you're like, oh, that's the null and default pattern. Because I can see one of them is a potentially null value, and then that's, okay. And then it just becomes, that's how we communicate that concept. And there you go with something that, it's clever in that it's shorter code, but it is actually useful because it sort of represents the thing you're trying to accomplish. And it's your own kind of syntax of, oh, this is how we do defaulting. So.
Well, I learned something new today. Like I said, every time we talk to him, I learn a little bit about it, and it makes me not want to use it.
Wow. I'm not sure why, because I just told you about something that is very, very useful, but okay. You used to use PHP. It's a great language.
No, and I do this I say this in a positive way, is saying like, when I used to use PHP, it was back in PHP. I'd have to really learn that. Like, it's something for me to go back to it. Would take a good how PHP's changed from 4 to 7. There's that you use. I'm like, wow, that would take me a good bit of time to learn.
I'm just gonna make this note here because I have no idea how this audio is gonna sound once we mash it together. But your internet connection that was having issues before, I think is having issues again.
Oh, well, here, let me
Because I
here.
got most of that, and it feels like we're about a second and a half, 2 seconds behind each other. So this may be a fun little podcast to get the audio married up with. I don't know how that one's gonna work out. So, oh, wait a second. Now it's just me. So Mark has gone, and I'm going to have to
There we
press the
go. Here we
button
go. Here we go.
maybe to bring him back. I was afraid I was going to have to tell everybody about how awesome PHP was.
I think my internet was bouncing around the Bahamas a little bit too much there.
Really, really. Were we VPNing again?
It was. And I was waiting for the moment to do that to switch up, so I could tell. Okay, first of all, the internet was actually going pretty good the whole time. I was like, oh, and I noticed same thing when you started talking. Yeah, you started stuttering. I started to have a delay, and I was like, all right, I probably have to switch this off.
Yep. So that'll be, who knows, if you've made it this far, you're listening to the podcast. I'm sorry for however that audio seemed to shift on us there while Mark tried to say how terrible PHP was, but we all know it's amazing.
So as we approach the holidays, Tim.
Oh no. Was it? Oh wait, so that was the controversial topic? Are we going into the non-controversial topic
Well,
now?
I think commenting code, writing good code, I think that people have many different perspectives about it. That's why I didn't know where we would fall in line, but like we usually do, I think we kind of fall in very similar camps.
Maybe many perspective, but I think we obviously know what the right perspective is.
I was thinking about, because you said you have a company with Christmas call coming up.
The thing that I said when we weren't online and not on the air, yes, yeah. I do have a.
So what kind of plan? What kind of Christmas plans do you have planned for your company? Because I don't have a company party at my
it's not
my school. So
party. It's an annual meeting. It's our year-end meeting.
Do you guys like exchange gifts?
No, it's not Christmassy. No, sorry. But no, there's no gift exchange, no weird awkward white elephant thing where everybody has to figure out like, oh, I'm gonna buy a $5 gift for somebody or something like that.
I miss those days. I do miss working. I do miss working in office. And
well, that's the thing. We don't work in an office. Like there's no office.
The awkward holiday time. With awkward holiday parties, shared food, shared gifts that you're talking about. That cost.
The shared food is always, that's interesting. When everybody brings in their own meal.
That's right. We share. It's a potluck, Tim.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, I experienced that outside of work. Church potlucks totally exist, and I think pretty much own the awkward food at potluck type space. But I can't remember. Like, I'm trying to remember if I was ever at a company where I had to bring food in. I don't think there was. I've been places where we had food like in the break room. Mm-hmm. Somebody either bring a snack in or something like that. But I can't remember any like, oh, we're all going to bring food in. Does that happen at higher educational organizations?
Not too much unless somebody retires. If somebody retires and they want to celebrate their retirement, then that may happen. But
is that lots of different food or just pretty much cake and that stuff?
Oh, yeah, different food. Yeah, we actually had my colleagues is having a baby. Actually, she's due. I think is it a couple days before Christmas, like the 22nd, 23rd. So around Christmas, she's gonna be having her baby. So we had a baby shower for her, and that was kind of a nice shared event.
We had one arrive on December 23rd, so she was
definitely makes the holidays very jolly.
Yeah. I don't even remember what the Christmas was like after she was born. That was. Yeah, I can't remember that Christmas too well. But
so, do you look okay? In my perspective of approaching the holidays, because of wrapping up school and like I'm liking this time because I'll have a little bit of a break. Definitely have to prep for my spring semester because I'm teaching 6 classes and it's a lot of content I'm gonna have to prepare for. So that's kind of on my list. But also looking forward to kind of getting back to some projects. Do you have that kind of time where do you have a good break around with work and with the holidays? You can kind of either do some family projects, home projects, or even some hobby technical projects you were thinking about?
Well, I mean, interesting question. I'm a contractor, right? So I work whenever. I think others may have actual days that they're supposed to take off. So because it's like a day off, so you should take the day off because that's the day you got off, right? I just take whatever days off I want, so that's a little bit of a different perspective. Historically, I tend to work a little bit over that holiday, but not as much as between Christmas and New Year's. Mm-hmm. Not as much as I normally would. It is one of those nice quiet times where nobody's expecting something to be done. So if you're trying to catch up on work stuff, you can do it. contractors' perspectives on work is a little bit different than normal people's. Just because we tend to work whenever we want to, and sometimes whenever we're needed. But
You
yeah,
know,
I think I'll be taking some time off. Probably doing some stuff around the house, stuff with the kids.
I totally agree about the quiet time. But I remember though, I always would feel bad for the IT guys
Oh yeah.
because I always remember they would always plan server updates or upgrades or anything
Oh,
or hardware
that's
over the holiday because it is downtime. People aren't on the
yeah.
systems as
People aren't
much.
using it. Yeah,
And I
yeah.
always felt bad for the IT guys when in my companies where they would, I know they'd be tasked with doing something around, between that week between Christmas and New Year's and just, yeah, sometimes have it rough.
That's why they celebrate Christmas on President's Day. That's when Christmas is observed for the IT department. But no real big plans yet. But we'll see. I mean, obviously, I've got plenty of things to take care of around the house. So
Yeah. And we're not going to talk about resolutions yet. I know that is our yearly
oh,
thing. You know how I love to talk about resolutions, and I know you
our
hate resolutions. So,
our yearly
but
thing.
I
Yeah,
do want
yeah.
you to start to prepare, start to think
Oh,
about
okay. What's
your
my New
new
Year's
your
resolution?
New Year's resolutions
That's a
and
tough one. That's a
kind of
tough
keep
one.
that in your
Let's
mind, in the
see.
back of
It
your
could be
mind, so
not to
we
have
can
a New
talk about
Year's
that later.
resolution. That could be one of them. I could do that. Yeah. I'll keep that in the back of my mind. Yeah, yeah. What was that your non topic, like your non controversial topic? Was, do I have to go to Christmas parties?
No, it just got me to think about. Well, you said you had like an annual
Yeah,
meeting,
it's
and
the annual
that
meeting.
I
Yeah,
just thought,
yeah.
okay, well, maybe it's a Christmas party. Maybe you're going to be singing,
Not
you're
quite.
singing some Christmas carols
No,
together. I don't
I
know.
don't think so.
Oh,
I
over
don't think
Zoom. I
so.
don't know.
Yeah, that's you know what doesn't work is Christmas carols over Zoom. Any singing over Zoom doesn't work. I mean, that lag part is just it's just a thing. It's a thing. So can't quite get in sync.
Yeah, because I was just thinking that, like, yeah, I kind of missed that part. That was a nice time, a nice like kind of leading up the holidays, kind of with your coworkers. I don't know, a little bit missed that.
Yeah, I mean, I never really. I've been a contractor for so long, that part wasn't not much I did there. But I can see how that would be a thing. But no Christmas parties at NCC
No, 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 we don't.
because you're already on break. Is that the thing?
Maybe I think that's what it is. Like faculty just check out. We're like,
Yeah,
okay,
it's like
that
because
second week, once that second week hits in December, when they're working on grade, doing their final grades, get those in, they're out.
right. So you have just one more week. Is that it? And then it's winter
I
break.
Yeah, the finals week is next week. Their projects are due. I don't have any finals in my current classes. I just do final projects, but they're all due next week. So basically, when they submit their projects on Tuesday, I'll be grading between, let's say,
Yeah. How
Wednesday
do
and
you
Friday.
grade the projects?
They submit them through Blackboard, our
Okay.
online learning system, and it basically is a zip file. I download it, review the code, test it out, both for my web design classes or my object-oriented programming classes. Just run it, look at the code, and just I have a rubric that I've used, like basically like a 20 to 30 point kind of or requirement rubric that I kind of follow. So do that a little bit.
What's because that's the thing that's subjective to me, or
Mhm.
seems very subjective. Is like you're looking at someone's code. How do you gauge good,
So what I
bad?
so what I try to do is, like I said, and this is how it evolved since I've been teaching for over 10 or 12 years. I don't know. Each year kind of gets to be a blur. But the more that I've been doing this, I do my grading has become more structured, where I'll use what's called a rubric, which is basically like a spreadsheet in a sense
Right.
of different requirements that I'm looking for with different like point scales, like a 1 to 5, saying, okay, this
Like,
is
does this work?
satisfactory, or this is weak, satisfactory, or great, or whatever they want to describe that.
And those categories would be like, hey, variable names, or
Yeah,
like just
exactly.
code
Yeah,
style. Was it
exactly. So I say,
actually
like,
readable? Was it terrible?
well, I try to be as specific as possible. So they say, if I'd say like they have to demonstrate their use of composition, that
Okay.
within their
Hmm.
classes, I would grade them on that. If they have to, how they're writing how they define their method names, their class names, just from a syntax standpoint, that's one of them, right? So we talk about syntax here today because that is something I do look for. I tell the students, when I'm grading your projects, these are the specific requirements I'm looking for. So kind of keep that in mind as you're writing the code, because when I'm looking through it and I'm going to be giving you that grade on the rubric, you'll know exactly kind of what that area is. And I think it's usually self-explanatory when they look at the rubric and they see the grades, and they say like, oh, I got like a 1 in this area. It's usually They kind of know it, right? And so it's
They
usually
realize, yeah.
yeah. But also I do find too students appreciate that, because there are professors, and I did this too in the beginning, where they're just like, it kind of feels like a B, kind of feels like a C.
Yeah, because I mean that's what
Yeah.
you're looking at somebody's work product, which to me the thing that would be difficult. And here I'm interested in this because I actually have a story of myself when I went to what was essentially a trade school, where it kind of worked in my advantage. I think, you could have one student that, like you said, you gave them templates to kind of start with, and they didn't do much
Yeah.
more than that.
Yeah.
And then you could have somebody who'd be like, "No, I'm doing it all," and they could try it and still kind of fail at their ambition, but still have demonstrated a greater understanding of the course material and what you were trying to get them to learn than someone whose thing worked well, but it worked well because it wasn't much more than just connecting the dots from the template that you gave them. So how do you measure and that's what seems to me interesting. Like, where does the difficulty of what you attempted to do, if it is a very open-ended, you get to pick your project.
Yeah, and that is something I do look for. And I tell them, like, since I'm giving you a lot of example code, and I tell them you could use example code from the textbook that we're using, example code that I write each week and give you to and talk through with you. I'm happy for you to use that, but then you need to extend that. You need to modify it. You need to, you're building this application or this game. You're going to be responsible for how these pieces fit together. So that is one of the things I look for from a grading perspective, is how you're using the example code in the class, and are they modifying it? Are they extending it? And I'll give them a grade on that, and that'll be basically worth maybe 5% of their overall grade of how they're doing that. They're just basically changing a couple variable names, but the way my templates example is, in order for them to meet the project requirements, they had to do a lot more than just what the template gives them, right? So they kind of have to take that next step. So if they just submit me basically just the template code with a few things changed, they're basically going to fail the project, right? So there's a whole level of technical requirements that they have to meet with that. But I do find that it's interesting too, the more rigid I get with how specific are the requirements and the rubrics that I use, when I graded a student's project and I go through that process with the math and the spreadsheet and I fill out all the dots there, their final point grade and the letter grade comes out to the same thing I used to feel for, like, okay, if I just look at a project, feel like, okay, that feels like a C project or a B project. It still comes out to that, but at least I documented it now, where I can show them exactly what it is.
An interesting correlation there. So it's like that, going into it and looking at the work and being like, feels like.
Yeah, which a lot of professors do that, and I did that too in the beginning. But I feel that it's not a good service to students, because they'll get that grade, but even if they see some comments of, okay, you should have done this better, this was wrong, they don't really know from a granular level exactly what went wrong in their project all the time. So I think they appreciate that, at least to see that document. Also, it's less feedback or comments or questions I get back too, where like saying, oh, I don't understand why I got this grade on this project. You explained to me. I used to get that all the time. I was like, okay, I'm stopping this. I'm like, I'm going to document this as much as possible, because this back and forth does not do me any good. It just kind of drags on the process of them understanding their grade. But I think if you kind of can find that good balance of using a rubric or using good documentation and how you're going to be grading, you'll still get to the point of like giving an honest grade. And on some level it is subjective, but you try to document to a point where it's subjective, but they understand it, your perspective and how that grade was assessed.
Right. No, that's great. Yeah, for me, it was the final project at the trade school was some type of, you had to build, and it was very open-ended. It was like you had to build your own electronics project of some kind. Now, some people built it themselves, but they basically bought a kit, and that was okay. If you could buy a kit, assemble it, and have a working thing, that was fine. I designed it. I designed my own basically light dimmer system that was supposed to run off of a MIDI interface where you would send commands to it and it would dim. And I failed to do that. I did not get that far. but in the end, my project had a bunch of little dip switches. Like if you've ever dug into your computer, there's just little tiny switches that are that can be soldered right to a circuit board, right? And you could set the value that you would want the light to be on using the dip switches to pick from basically 0 to 256, right? And it dimmed the light. And the professor was like, yep, that's fine, because he realized the difference between ready-made kit that you just have proved that you know how to put something together, you know how to troubleshoot it, you you can do that versus designed your own circuits, bought the ICs that you needed, put them together, wired it up. He was like, "Yep, you're good."
Yeah, that's because you made everything yourself.
Right.
So there's a lot of credit for that. That's why I tell my students too. If you feel like you're going down a road where you're going to be faced with problems you have no solution for, and you also feel like the time is going to be limited, simplify. Because I'd rather see your own solution in a very simplified form, and if I know that you came up with it yourself, rather than you just kind of copy and pasting something from someplace and then trying to pass it off as your own, or trying to do something with that you may not understand. I want you to understand the process, even if it's a very simplified version of it. I highly encourage that.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. So you're that next week you have to look at all these projects and
look at grade the projects. And for next semester, which I know will be, if we keep doing the show, who knows, go to the new year, maybe that'll be one of our resolutions. Maybe we'll be like, yes, we're going to commit to doing the show one more year. I have no idea.
You have no idea. Okay.
But if we do, I know one topic that we talk about, which I'm going to be teaching 2 courses that we'll find interesting. My mobile development course. I decided I'm going to focus on Android.
Okay. So you're going to actually be using Kotlin and
yes. So I think because the one thing I was hesitant about doing that in the past, because not everybody has an Android phone, but the simulators gotten pretty well on the computers at school and our labs. Yeah. I think they're pretty good, and the Android simulators got to be much faster now. So I think it's a better experience, because that's the one thing I always. When I was teaching from iOS perspective, one of the reasons why I taught it from iOS, because we were a Mac lab, but also the iOS simulator was super fast. So even if somebody did have an iPhone, they could get a pretty good development experience right there, by testing their app on the computer. Yeah. I think Android's gotten to that point too, where I think it's a pretty good experience. So I'm going to do using that. Yes, I am learning Kotlin right now too. So I'm kind of reading some documentation, doing some tests with that, because I've written Android before, but from a Java perspective. So going to be learning Kotlin for the first time.
I feel like Kotlin and Java though. They feel very similar, I think, right?
Yeah.
They're both strongly typed languages.
So I think that'll be a good experience. And also then teaching.
So wait. I got to ask though, if you're using Kotlin, you're doing this in a JetBrains IDE, right?
Yes, absolutely. That was the other reason too. I kind of pushed me to do, because I
don't want to hear you writing Kotlin in VS Code or anything like that.
I got to admit, Tim, once I moved back to Linux and then tried out JetBrains and Linux, I'm like, it's all I use now. I still use my Doom Emacs for my basic text editing, but when I'm actually working on a program now, I'm using either WebStorm, PyCharm. PyCharm is great. I've been loving using that in my class, and I'll be using the Android. Yeah.
Not sponsored by JetBrains, but it should have been.
Should have been.
If you listen to us from episode 1 to now, you will see the transformation. I mean, they should pay me.
Yeah,
I should be a JetBrains developer evangelist. That's what.
And the other course that I'll probably definitely have some conversations about is Advanced Web Technologies, which is meant to be a capstone course for the web development program. Which basically it's a course. I know it's a weird name. I did not give it a name.
I feel like this is the title across some door in some military complex, like Advanced Web Technologies. Yeah,
I know it's probably not
the mind control project
name for the course. I did not design the name. If I could rename it, I probably would. But I do like the style of the course, because it's meant to be a capstone course. It's meant to kind of take all these technologies that they would learn, like in their client-side scripting course, they learn JavaScript. Okay. In their server-side course, they learn PHP and MySQL. They have a database development course where they spend a lot of time with MySQL. So basically taking all these technologies that they've learned in all these courses and then just trying to do it in a professional way. So that's why I haven't taught this course in a couple of years, just because of time, but it's one of my favorite course teach, because it's meant to prepare them, saying, okay, once you get into the real world, this is how you're going to be using the technology. Because the one thing I really aggravates me, and I saw this with my students, my Python class, they tell me up front, when they take their client-side scripting, learn JavaScript, they just learn with stupid, simple examples that are not practical in the real world at all.
They don't even try to encapsulate anything. It's just like, throw it on the page. Throw it on the page.
This course gives me opportunity to write that wrong, basically.
And then the goal at the end, some project that very much ties all these technologies together.
So in the past, we did a big group project, try to divvy up the work between the class. I'm not sure if that kind of goes well and not, depending upon who's in the class. But definitely to have a web application that's both front end, back end, so they can see all the pieces. Last time I taught this,
some API design.
Yeah, I did that a little bit, but that was a little bit difficult for them to understand. But it's something that we cover.
I mean, if you want to talk about what they should understand, that's one thing they should understand. Yeah, I mean, we've got the whole movement to API first, and the reason is because it makes sense.
Yeah,
if you're building something to power your client side, interface.
Yeah.
Shouldn't your customers have access to that? Or maybe you might want to use that for your second client-side interface, you know?
I agree, Tim.
All right, well, stay tuned. We have another couple weeks before Christmas. Mark's going to try to get me to make a New Year's resolution. And I think if we see Mark's Christmas spirit increasing, I think it's just going to get even better as he wraps up this all this work. So
I may grow my Santa beard too. I think I'm working on that too.
Ooh. Next week, more Santa beard from Mark, and pretty much the same old thing for me.
All right. I know you got to head off, and I got to head off too.
Yeah.